it all. I'll always defend it, support it too. If you don't agree, get the hell with you. Send our brothers away to a foreign land. Tell the families they'll be back as soon as they can. On the way back to the land of the free. But for now we're gonna fight to protect you and me. We're from America, home of the brave, land of the free. We're from America. Now the whole world will finally see.
We need an alternative to the dollar. They don't want to buy our debt. They don't want our currency. They realize that it's not going to be worth anything. Now we think that the Chinese have no choice, right? That the Chinese, they have to buy our dollars because they own so many of them. They don't have a choice. Last week, the Reserve Bank of India bought about $7 billion. They bought 100 metric tons of gold. Why do you think they did that? They paid over $1,000 an ounce. They realize that the dollar's days are numbered. You're having people around, central banks around the world are going to be buying gold. So we're not going to be able to finance this the way we did in the 90s and the early part of this decade by borrowing from the rest of the world. The idea, we keep thinking too that, the world needs to buy these dollars because they need our market. They need to be able to sell us products. That without American consumers, all the people working around the world would be unemployed because there'd be no one to buy their stuff. And this is probably the most asinine concept that will one day, when the historians write about this period, this will be the government thinks that the key to economic growth is stimulating demand. We keep hearing that. Demand is down. Demand is never down. It's production that's down. It's supply that's down. That's what needs to be stimulated. I drove here in a car. I didn't fly here in my own helicopter. Well, I want one. I'd like to keep it parked on my yacht. The government doesn't have to stimulate all that desire in me. What limits it is production, how productive I am. That's what limits what I can buy. But I want all kinds of stuff. So we're going to get this big crash in the dollar because of all the money we printed. All the government has done, we haven't eliminated these losses. We've just changed their form. The government made it so that if you had money in the bank, you didn't lose your bank account. Your bank made a bunch of stupid loans, but your money's still there, right? Well, the government isn't magic. They can't create wealth out of thin air. But they can transform through a monetary sleight of hand how those losses are going to hit you. So instead of losing your money is going to lose its value. So we're going to have a crash in the dollar. And the dollar is going to collapse. And when that happens, prices are going to go through the roof for consumer goods, most particularly for commodities like food and energy. Initially, the government will say it doesn't matter because it's not part of the core CPI. China, a lot of people were able to get mortgages that were, for the first few years, they had a very low payment. And that enabled people to buy a house they couldn't afford because for a few years, they could afford the payment. They couldn't afford the payments later on, but no one cared because by then they were all going to be rich. So it didn't matter if your mortgage payment doubled because you were going to be rich because you bought a house. Well, the government is making the same mistake. The huge deficits that we have right now, they're being financed with short-term bills. The national debt is like one big adjustment rate mortgage. The Chinese and the Japanese have given us a teaser rate. Well, what happens when it resets and interest rates double, triple, quadruple? We can't make the payments. It's just impossible. So the only way to finance it is by printing money. And then we're going to have this real crisis. Because then the government is going to be forced to do something very, very uncomfortable. Right? Now, we're going to be in that situation sometime, maybe in 2010, maybe 2011. The dollar is going to be in serious decline. We will breach through the 70 handle on the dollar index. We'll be going through 60. The dollar will be under serious pressure. Oil prices will be back well above 100, maybe headed towards 200. Food prices, everything's going to be going up. Long-term interest rates are going to start to move up. Unemployment, of course, is going to keep getting worse. It's not going to get better. So unemployment might be 13% or 14% officially. Unofficially, it'll be over 20%. And the government's going to be forced to raise interest rates. Raise interest rates into that worsening recession. Now, if they do it, then you're going to have all of the entities that they bailed out fail again. And they're going to have to let them fail. They're not going to be able to rescue them again. Because if they do, the dollar will fall even more. The government understands that the solutions are not in the government. The solutions are in the market. The government created the problems. They're serious, but they're not insurmountable as long as the government gets out of the way. And the first thing they could think of was, yes, we're all capitalists, but this is an emergency. They said, this is no time for principle. We need to take action. As if you abandon your principles the minute things get difficult. As if capitalism only works in good times, but in bad times you need socialism. So I don't want the government to interfere with commerce and business, only to the extent that my business might impose an externality, whether it's a pollution or something like that. And they should not interfere with individuals in their relationships with one another, in the personal decisions, the choices that they make in their lives, so long as those choices don't negatively impact somebody else. So, and wages are prices, they're the price of labor. But with so many people unemployed, it's going to be hard for workers to get much higher wages. And of course, there are a lot of things that we produce that we can export. And so if the dollar is losing value as a result of inflation, there are a lot of products that American manufacturers or American farmers or whoever are selling in America that they're going to try to export. And as exports go up, that diminishes the supply of goods for Americans. So even though demand is falling, supply is falling. And so prices can still rise. People who think you can't have inflation with high unemployment don't know anything about inflation or employment. Because in general, the way the Federal Reserve tries to promote growth is by creating inflation. Because that's the only thing it can do. Right? The Federal Reserve, all they can do is print money, or they can add money to circulation or take it out. So that's the only tool they have, right? They manipulate it through interest rates or open market operations, but the Fed just decides how much inflation it creates. And so when they're trying to fight unemployment, they're doing it by creating inflation. Now, in the long run, the only way the Fed can help lay the foundation for long-term growth is to provide a sound currency and to let the markets set interest rates in an efficient manner. I mean, the reason that we have no savings in America is because interest rates have been too low. Right? Under a normal situation like the United States, where nobody is saving and everybody is borrowing, interest rates would have to rise. That would discourage borrowing and encouraging savings. And then we would have an equilibrium. We would bring up our savings, and the market would clear. But the Federal Reserve intervenes and artificially creates money to keep interest rates lower than they should be. And that creates problems because we don't have the savings to finance all this borrowing. And the Federal Reserve, in order to give you that note, would have to have that paper plus gold behind it. And the Federal Reserve, they were not even allowed, part of the charter, the Federal Reserve was not allowed to buy treasury debt. They weren't even allowed to do it originally. They changed it in World War I because the government wanted to sell bonds to the Federal Reserve to fight the First World War. So they amended the Federal Reserve Act to allow the Federal Reserve to buy these bonds. They never should have done that. But instead of punishing the Fed for their role in creating this crisis, we're rewarding them by giving them enhanced power. And so it's all, Washington's the only place where you reward failure. The problem is the tax consequences. So yeah, what I would be in favor of is abolishing the capital gains on precious metals so that gold could in effect circulate as money. But ideally, we would be on the gold standard because the politicians don't have any discipline. The minute you let them print money, they do it. They never can resist that temptation.